everything changes. Everything is in constant flow. Everything moves. You can't step into the same river twice. Because the second time, neither the river is the same river, nor are you the same person. The only thing that never changes is change itself. Heraclitus. Football is a living, breathing organism. It evolves. It transforms. It never stands still. If we could travel back in time and watch a football match from centuries ago played the way it was originally conceived, we'd probably be baffled. Once known merely as the guy who saves shots, goalkeepers today start the game, shape the game, sometimes even break the game. But how did the most isolated role in football become the brain of build-up? The sweeper is gone, but sweeper-keeper was born. In this episode, we tell the story of that evolution, from ball stopper to ball distributor, from reactive to revolutionary. Let's start with a simple definition of a goalkeeper. In English, the word goal literally means an aim or a target. That's why the British chose to name not just the act of scoring, but also the physical structure measuring 7.3 by 2.4 meters by that same word. Because in this game, that's where everything is aimed. And the goalkeeper, he's the one assigned to protect it. In the previous episode, we mentioned how early versions of football resembled rugby in many ways. One of those similarities was that aerial balls could be caught by any player, regardless of position. But in the 1870s, as the sport evolved into a true foot ball game, handling the ball is banned for all players, except one from each team. A lone exception. His only task? Prevent goals. And even then, he could only touch the ball if he was directly defending his goal, and once he caught it, he wasn't even allowed to move with it. That's how the goalkeeper position was born. Back then, while the rest of the players moved within loosely defined roles, not yet clearly split into defenders, midfielders, or forwards, the goalkeeper was the first role to be specifically defined, which makes it not only the most unique, but also the oldest officially recognized position in the game. In that early form, goalkeeping felt less like a footballing role and more like a standalone profession, a job entirely separate from what the others were doing on the pitch. Over time, of course, new regulations gradually integrated keepers more into the rhythm of the match. In 1883, for example, they were allowed to move up to 2 steps while holding the ball, and starting from 1901, they could make plays with the ball for reasons beyond simply saving shots. Still, for decades, goalkeepers remained largely detached from the flow of play, and maybe nothing illustrates that better than the story told by Charlton keeper Sam Bartram about a match against Chelsea in 1937. There was heavy fog that day, he wrote in his autobiography. At one point, the referee stopped the match until visibility improved. Eventually, the game resumed, but I could barely make out any shapes in the distance. No one came near my area for a long time. I stood there, thinking how great our boys were. We must have pinned Chelsea deep into their half. I was shuffling and stomping my feet to keep warm, just waiting, but something felt off. We hadn't scored. If we had, surely everyone would have reset positions. Then, through the mist, I noticed a figure walking toward me. It was a policeman. He stared at me in disbelief and asked what I was still doing there. That's when I learned the match had been called off 15 minutes earlier, and the entire pitch had been cleared. When I got back to the dressing room, the lads had already showered, and, of course, they had a good laugh at my expense. Now, I'll admit, part of why I shared this anecdote was to make you smile. But even so, it says a lot about how detached goalkeepers used to be from the rest of the action, from another world, sometimes even from another match. We've talked about what goalkeeping used to mean, but to truly grasp how the role evolved, we first need to revisit a position that didn't survive the journey. The libero, derived from the Latin word for free. The name itself sums up the spirit of the role, invented in the 1930s by Austrian coach Karl Rappan, who called it the Verrou, the lock. This role would go on to define an entire era of defensive football. This was a time when man-marking was the norm, and the offside trap was barely a concept. So the libero stood just behind the defensive line, unassigned to any specific opponent, a free man. His job? To clean up what others couldn't, to intercept strikers slipping through the back line, and to sweep up loose balls before they became threats. That's why the English simply called him the sweeper, but there was more to it than defense. Since the libero didn't mark anyone, he was often the most unmarked player once his team regained possession, which made him the natural outlet, the playmaker from the back. With the widest view of the pitch and the most time on the ball, liberos were expected to lead, to read the game, to command teammates, and to distribute the ball with grace. Franz Beckenbauer, Franco Baresi, Daniel Passarella, Matthias Sammer. Some of the greatest minds the game has ever seen, all played as liberos. But then, the game changed. By the late 1980s, systems built around the sweeper began to fade. Total football was on the rise, defensive lines were pushed higher up the pitch, and in 1990, a change to the offside rule accelerated the libero's extinction. What once gave teams security and control, now became a liability. A spare man behind the back line no longer fit in a system that aimed to trap forwards offside. Keeping someone back would simply break the trap. It made no sense anymore. Still, the role's defensive value hadn't disappeared. There was still a need for someone to sweep up danger behind the defense, but who could do that without breaking the offside line? The answer was already on the pitch. In fact, he was the only one legally allowed to stay behind the back line, the goalkeeper. It didn't take long for managers to realize that keepers could inherit parts of the libero's job, and slowly they did. In the 90s, it wasn't uncommon to hear this classic commentary line after a keeper charged out of his box. The goalkeeper leaves his line like a true libero and clears the danger. At first, it was an exception. Soon, it would become an expectation. The job of organizing the backline, it too eventually fell to the goalkeeper. After all, who else could see the entire pitch from the widest possible angle? But this new responsibility meant something bigger. Goalkeepers could no longer just watch the game. They had to read it, process it, command it, and they were uniquely built for it. Not only did they have the best view, they also had the calmest heart, because unlike their teammates, goalkeepers didn't need to run. Their pulse stayed low, their minds stayed clear, and in the chaos of a match, that clarity became power. Football lets you play with any tactical shape you want. 3 forwards or none, 5 defenders or 0 fullbacks. The options are endless, but there's one thing you can't do: play without a goalkeeper. If your keeper gets injured or sent off, and you've used all your subs, you must assign an outfield player to take his place. That's how non-negotiable the position is. In 1992, the backpass rule was abolished, and that changed everything. Coaches could no longer ignore the man in gloves. They had to include him in the tactical blueprint, but it was going to take time, because the world wasn't exactly full of technically gifted goalkeepers. In the early years, passing back to your keeper was risky. Sure, we admired Lev Yashin for how he started attacks, but even Yashin's brilliance came mostly from his throws. The few keepers who felt comfortable on the ball, René Higuita, Peter Schmeichel, Chilavert, were often seen as eccentrics, entertaining but slightly mad. That perception changed with the backpass rule. Suddenly, a goalkeeper who could accurately distribute the ball with his feet wasn't a liability. He was a weapon, and teams started to realize that a keeper with vision and passing range could dictate entire phases of play. South American goalkeepers, in particular, were often a step ahead, not just saving goals, but shaping them. Rinus Michels and his protege Johan Cruyff were among the first to experiment with what we now call the sweeper keeper. But back then, their idea, what they referred to as total football, was far from mainstream. Few followed their lead. Still, the seeds they planted didn't go to waste. Years later, another Dutchman, Frank Rijkaard, helped them bloom, and eventually a bald Catalan would take that philosophy to its peak. I'm kidding, of course. Back then, the coach still had hair. If you were to ask who the greatest goalkeeper in Turkish football history is, most would say Rüştü Reçber, without much debate. He wore the national jersey 120 times, a record that still stands. And when he signed for Barcelona in 2003, it was a proud moment for Turkish football. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of handing him the gloves, coach Frank Rijkaard chose a 20-year-old with barely any experience. Had Rijkaard been Catalan, people might have screamed favoritism, but he was Dutch. And when a Dutchman picks a rookie like Victor Valdés over a seasoned international like Rüştü, you assume there's a reason. Years later, Rijkaard explained it himself. Rüştü's goalkeeping abilities were never in question, but he simply couldn't distribute the ball the way the system demanded. Valdés, on the other hand, had that calm, precise footwork, and the way Rijkaard wanted to play, he needed that more than reflex saves. When Guardiola took over, he didn't just keep Valdés, he doubled down on him. Because by then, tiki-taka had arrived, an evolved, surgical version of total football. And this time, it took over the entire footballing world. No, not every team could play tiki-taka, but the seductive power of possession, that caught everyone. And to keep the ball, keepers had to become more than just shot stoppers. Even if they didn't want to, they had to get involved. They had to touch the ball, control it, pass it, That triggered a revolution in training grounds. Goalkeepers began spending more time with the ball at their feet, improving control, mastering passing patterns, reinventing themselves. Naturally, the Germans took this idea and engineered it to perfection. They gave the world the ultimate version of the sweeper keeper, Manuel Neuer. A product of Schalke's academy, Neuer wasn't just a phenomenal shot stopper. He could play with both feet, launching pinpoint passes to teammates like a seasoned midfielder. And suddenly, something became clear. If your keeper could pass like that, maybe your number 6 didn't need to drop between the centre-backs anymore. Maybe the goalkeeper was part of the passing structure now, not just included essential. After Neuer, the rise of this new generation distributor goalkeeper was swift and unstoppable. It came as no surprise that South American names like Alisson, Ederson, and Emiliano Martinez led the charge. But it didn't take long for Europe to catch up. From Jan Sommer to Ter Stegen, from Kepa to Unai Simon, from Onana to Diogo Costa. Suddenly, nearly every top league had its own version of the sweeper keeper. But here's the thing, it's no longer just about keeping the ball. It's about breaking the press. In today's game, teams that press high do it everywhere. They seek one-on-one matchups across the entire pitch, everywhere, except one spot. No one presses the opposing goalkeeper man-to-man, because committing to him means freeing someone else in the build-up. And that one unmarked man, he becomes the key to unlocking everything. Because when your keeper is comfortable with the ball at his feet, when he can calmly rest his foot on the ball, force the opponent to shift, and then pierce the press with a short pass, that's when the dominoes start to fall. A single +1 advantage at the back triggers a chain reaction up the field. Each successful pass drags a defender out of shape, creating overloads everywhere. Suddenly, there's a free man in midfield, then another in the final third. All because your keeper didn't panic. He played it short and set the entire attack in motion. Many pressing teams today won't even bother closing down a technically skilled keeper. They know that once the press is broken, the rest collapses behind it. 100 years ago, the goalkeeper was something else entirely. A solitary role, detached from the other 10, defined by its own rules, its own responsibilities. Today that's changed. Yes, their first job is still to save, but if they can't play, they might not even make the team sheet. The game's evolution has erased one position entirely and transformed another into something unrecognizable. If you've enjoyed this deep dive, let us know by hitting like. We're thinking of turning this into a series. Today, we explored the evolution of goalkeepers. Next, we might look at centre-backs, then midfielders, all the way to the number 9. Thanks for watching, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next one.